An officer heard a canine German Shepherd whimper in the snow. What he found next broke his heart. A young officer patrolling the icy streets of Clearwater heard something. Not a siren, not a voice, but a soft, trembling whimper from under an old, rusted awning. There lay an old German Shepherd, soaked and shivering. Around his neck, a cracked leather collar. Shadow, canine retired. When Noah knelt down, the dog didn't growl or flinch. He just let out a sound, full of longing, the kind only a soul once loved and then forgotten can make. What happened next will stay with you. So tell me, would you have stopped? Comment below, and if you believe no hero should be left in the cold, hit subscribe. This is Shadow's story, and it might just change the way you see loyalty forever. The night had wrapped Clearwater, Montana, in a thick blanket of snow. Bitter winds swept through the skeletal trees lining the outskirts of town, howling like distant wolves. Lamplights cast golden halos onto the frozen sidewalks, but the streets were mostly silent, too cold for even the restless to roam. It was the kind of night where loneliness crept in like frost through old windows. Officer Noah Briggs tightened his gloved hands around the steering wheel of his patrol SUV, the heater humming softly. At 29, Noah was known in the force for his quiet resolve and sharp instincts. He had a lean, athletic build, light olive skin, and short-cropped dark hair that always looked a little tousled no matter how early his shift started. His hazel eyes, once filled with youthful conviction, now bore the weight of something deeper, something fractured. 6 months ago, he'd lost his partner and closest friend, Officer Mike Rourke, in a failed drug raid. Mike had been the kind of man who laughed loudly, loved deeply, and always had Noah's back. And when he died, Noah had been there. He saw it, heard the last breath. Since then, the grief hadn't left. It just changed shape, lingering in the way Noah drove slowly through neighborhoods long after calls ended, or the way he sometimes stopped his cruiser on an empty street, engine running, just listening to the night. Tonight was one of those nights. The radio was quiet, save for the occasional burst of static. As Noah turned down an icy service road, headlights passed over the front of a long-abandoned supermarket, Clearwater Value Mart. Its faded sign still clinging to the frame, the letters cracked and broken. That's when he heard it. A sound, faint and muffled beneath the wind. Not a cry, not a bark, but a whimper, soft, broken, almost too weak to register. Noah eased to a stop. He turned off the engine and stepped out into the snow. The cold slapped his face, and his boots crunched through the ice as he followed the sound toward the rusted awning of the storefront. There, just beside a pile of wind-blown trash and broken crates, was a lump of matted fur. Noah's heart clenched. It was a dog. No, not just a dog. A German Shepherd, large and old, curled in a tight, shivering ball. His fur was soaked to the skin, tangled and dirty, with patches missing near the ribs. The dog's chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths, and when Noah approached, one eye flicked open, clouded with age but still burning with something ancient and raw. The dog whimpered again. Noah crouched. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured. "Easy now." He reached out slowly, letting the back of his gloved hand hover before placing it gently on the dog's side. The shepherd let out a low, raspy moan. Not of fear, not even pain, but something closer to longing. Around the dog's neck was a tattered leather collar, stiff with age. Noah turned it slightly, brushing away ice. There were words, barely visible. Shadow, canine retired. A retired police dog, abandoned, alone. Noah swallowed hard. The cold seemed suddenly sharper, crueler. He looked into Shadow's eyes, one cloudy, one amber and alert, and something cracked inside him. A flash of memory. Mike's grin as he ruffled the ears of his own canine partner, his laugh echoing down the precinct hallway. Noah pulled the thick patrol blanket from the back seat of his SUV and wrapped it gently around Shadow's body. The dog didn't resist, only released a soft, trembling sigh as Noah lifted him into his arms. Despite his size, the dog was shockingly light. Too light. "You're not dying here," Noah said under his breath. "Not in this snow. Not alone." He laid Shadow in the back seat, tucking the blanket around him. Then, before starting the car, he paused, looking at the dog through the rearview mirror. There was no whimpering now, just the faint rise and fall of breath, peaceful. Noah didn't know who had left him there or why a once proud canine would end up half frozen behind a grocery store. But he felt it deep in his gut. This was no coincidence. As snow began to fall again, thick and silent, Noah turned the vehicle toward home. His apartment was small, barely enough space for himself. But tonight, he'd make room. Because sometimes saving someone else is the only way to start saving yourself. Noah Briggs's apartment sat on the second floor of a narrow red brick building tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered video rental store. Both remnants of a town that had seen busier decades. The windows overlooked an empty alley, and the heater inside groaned like an old man with every gust of wind that pressed against the glass. Snow still fell beyond the streetlights, thick and silent, as the young officer carefully carried Shadow up the stairs, wrapped in the patrol blanket. Inside, the space was modest. One bedroom, a sagging couch, and a kitchenette that smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. A wall-mounted photo of Noah and Officer Mike Rourke, taken just 2 months before Mike's death, hung beside a dusty medal of commendation. Noah gently laid Shadow on a folded towel near the radiator, then stepped back, observing. The dog didn't move much. His breaths were steady but shallow, ears flat, body curled protectively even in warmth. The collar around his neck had hardened at the edges, like old leather forgotten in sun and rain. Noah filled a basin with warm water, brought out a towel, and took off his jacket. His motions were slow, deliberate, respectful. He dipped a washcloth into the water and began cleaning the matted fur, layer by layer. Underneath the dirt and knots, the truth emerged. Long, pale scars ran diagonally across Shadow's chest and down his left side. Old wounds, surgical in shape, not random. Some had stitch marks. Near the base of his rib cage, there was an almost perfect circle, the kind Noah recognized from bullet entries. Shadow didn't whimper. He simply watched Noah with that haunting eye, the amber one that still burned. "You've been through hell," Noah whispered, not expecting a response, "and still standing. Just barely." He carefully removed the collar. The inside was cracked, almost brittle, and beneath the flap near the buckle was a patch sewn by hand. Noah turned it over and saw, in faded black ink, "If found, return to Officer Kyle R., 5112, Divid K9. The name stirred something. A ghost from the precinct logs. Kyle Rourke had a brother, but Kyle himself? Noah couldn't quite place it. Still, he folded the collar carefully and placed it beside the towel. Shadow made no sound during the entire process. No growl, no shift, no trust either. Just observation. The food came next. Noah opened a can of beef stew he kept for emergencies and slid it into a bowl, kneeling beside the dog. Shadow sniffed, blinked, then turned his head away. Noah didn't press. "Suit yourself," he murmured. "I'll try again in the morning." As he cleaned up, his phone buzzed. An incoming message from Captain Raymond Ellis, his commanding officer. "Report to Station 0800. Update needed on Clearwater abduction case. New footage retrieved. Clean this one up fast." Noah sighed. Captain Ellis was a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s, known more for his deadlines than his empathy. He ran the Clearwater PD like an old Army unit. Efficient, sharp, no room for dragging feet. Years ago, Ellis had earned his stripes in Los Angeles before transferring to quieter waters after a heart scare. Since then, he'd maintained a stern distance from the officers under him. Noah respected him, but never felt seen by the man. He pocketed the phone and glanced at the clock. 2:14 a.m. Shadow was still curled up near the heater, eyes open. Noah crossed the room and sat near him, Not touching, just there. The silence between them was not awkward. It was familiar, healing. The next morning, the snow had stopped and the world was covered in that soft post-storm hush. Shadow was still alive, still breathing. Noah placed a small bowl of fresh water and another of food beside him. Shadow sniffed again, licked once, and this time, ate 3 bites. Progress. At the station, fluorescent lights buzzed above dull carpet. Noah entered briefing room 2B, where Detective Sarah Klein was already reviewing footage on a portable monitor. Sarah, 34, was tall and sharply built, always dressed in neat black slacks and fitted sweaters. She had pale blonde hair tied into a tight bun, and a surgical scar ran just beneath her left eyebrow, barely visible unless you were looking. A former foster kid turned detective, Sarah was fiercely private, efficient, and always 3 steps ahead in any room. Her no-nonsense exterior masked a deep-seated protectiveness for the innocent, especially kids. She looked up when Noah entered. "You're late," she said flatly. "Morning to you, too," Noah muttered, taking a seat beside her. She pointed at the grainy footage playing in loops. "This is from the church security cam near Hawthorne and Elm, 5 blocks from the abduction site." Noah watched. A dark figure moved across the alley. Then, something else, low to the ground, 4-legged, fast. Sarah hit pause. That's not a raccoon or stray cat." He leaned closer. "Looks like a dog." "Exactly. And not just any dog. See the build? German Shepherd. Likely adult. Broad shoulders, wide stance. Same type that left paw prints near the dumpster where the child's backpack was found." Noah blinked. "No ID on the dog?" Sarah shook her head. "No tags. No known strays that match. But—" She opened another file, an old service photo from a federal training archive. The same dog, or close enough to send a shiver down Noah's spine. "Name, Shadow," Sarah read aloud. "Last listed as operational in a federal canine unit disbanded in 2017. Handler, Officer Kyle R." Noah felt the breath catch in his throat. He stood abruptly. "I have to go." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Noah? Why?" But he was already halfway out the door. The sun was beginning to burn through the gray haze that hung over Clearwater. The snow from the night before had begun to melt, forming icy puddles along cracked sidewalks and dripping from rust-stained gutters. Noah Briggs drove in silence, one hand steady on the wheel while the other rested near the passenger seat, where Shadow lay curled on a blanket, his head down but eyes alert. The vet's clinic sat on the edge of town near the outskirts where boarded-up houses met open pasture. A small, blue, wooden building with a crooked Holloway veterinary sign. It looked more like an old farmhouse than a place of medicine. But for Noah, it was the only place that came to mind, and the only person he could trust with what felt like more than just a dog. Dr. Grace Holloway emerged from the front door before Noah even cut the engine. In her mid-60s, Grace was a tall, angular woman with silver blonde hair tied in a long braid down her back. Her thin-framed glasses constantly slid down her nose, and she had a voice like morning frost, crisp but not unkind. Decades of working with injured animals and grieving pet owners had made her both gentle and unsparing. She eyed Shadow as Noah lifted the dog into his arms. "He's old," she said simply, "and freezing." "He wouldn't eat until this morning," Noah said, walking beside her toward the examination room. "Didn't make a sound when I found him. Just looked at me like he knew something I didn't." Grace led him into a room painted pale green, with outdated posters about tick prevention and a faded calendar from last year. The table creaked under Shadow's weight as Noah laid him down. The dog didn't resist, just breathed shallowly and watched the ceiling with tired eyes. Grace gently ran her hands over Shadow's ribs, then examined the scars on his side and belly. Her face stiffened. "These aren't from dogfights," she murmured, "or accidents. These are service wounds, surgical sites here, and this indentation, fragment trauma. He's been through combat." Noah nodded. I found a name on the collar. Officer Kyle R. That made Grace pause. She stepped back, crossing her arms. Kyle Rourke? You knew him? I treated his canine years ago. That was before Kyle joined the federal task force. His dog was... She blinked, then looked down. Shadow. The room felt suddenly too still. He's a legend in certain circles, Grace continued. Shadow and Kyle were deployed for search and recovery after the 2015 flood in Oklahoma. He sniffed out survivors from beneath collapsed trailers and warehouses. Later, they transferred to a special federal unit tasked with undercover surveillance and operations. Urban work. Dangerous stuff. Noah's jaw tightened. What happened? Kyle died 3 years ago. Car bomb during a stakeout. Rumor was the target knew they were being watched. After Kyle's death, Shadow vanished. The agency assumed he'd been rehomed or quietly euthanized. He wasn't, Noah said, voice low. Someone left him to die behind a supermarket. Grace reached out and touched the side of Shadow's muzzle. The dog closed his eyes at her touch. He remembers, she whispered. As Noah helped Grace finish the examination, checking Shadow's vitals, confirming old injuries, administering a mild sedative for inflammation, his phone buzzed on the metal tray. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice was male, calm, almost too measured. If you want to know who's behind the Clearwater kidnappings, look at K-9 unit archives from 2015. Start with the handlers who never made it home. Noah's blood chilled. Who is this? Click. The line went dead. He stared at the screen, heart racing. The number was already gone. Grace noticed. Something wrong? Noah shook his head, pocketing the phone. Just another question without a name. Shadow stirred slightly on the table, tail twitching once. Grace said nothing for a while, then, some dogs grieve in silence. Others remember and wait. Noah's eyes flicked toward the dog. He didn't know what Shadow remembered, but it was something, maybe someone. And now, maybe it was coming back to the surface. Grace handed Noah a small folder with medical notes and a packet of antibiotics. You can take him home, keep him warm. Soft food, short walks. He'll need time to rebuild trust, and Noah... He looked at her. Don't just treat him like a case. I wasn't planning on it. She smiled faintly, then nodded toward the hallway. The world forgets its heroes too fast. Don't be the next to. As Noah loaded Shadow back into the SUV and pulled out onto the road, the morning sun finally broke through the low clouds, casting a thin line of light across the dash. Shadow blinked against the brightness, and for the first time, his ears lifted slightly. The wind began to howl just after dusk. It crept through the cracks in the windows of Noah's apartment, rattled the fire escape, and tugged at the edges of the world like a restless spirit. The temperature had dropped sharply, and now the air outside had a sharp, crystalline bite to it. A storm was coming. Noah stood by the window, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hand, staring at the street lamp being swallowed by swirling snowflakes. Behind him, Shadow lay on the rug near the radiator, wrapped in an old quilt. His breathing had grown steadier since the vet visit, and he now followed Noah with his eyes, not trustfully, not yet, but with the silent presence of something ancient and watchful. The lights flickered, then went out. Noah set down the mug, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and muttered, "Great." Power outages weren't rare in Clearwater, especially with the town's aging infrastructure. Still, the timing made something in his chest tighten. He checked his phone. No signal. The snow was now blowing sideways. Just then, Shadow raised his head. Ears forward, body rigid. He growled, not at Noah, but at the back door. Noah stood still. "What is it?" Then Shadow barked, not just once. It was sudden and loud, urgent. He scrambled to his feet with more strength than Noah expected and padded quickly to the door, growling low. Noah hesitated only a second before grabbing his coat, slipping the flashlight into his pocket, and opening the door. The cold punched him in the face. Shadow didn't wait. He darted into the yard, his paws moving fast despite the snow. Noah cursed and followed, boots crunching against the frozen ground. They moved through the back lot, past the fence, and into the trees behind the apartment complex. The woods back here were mostly forgotten, used by teenagers in summer and ignored in winter. But Shadow moved as if he knew exactly where he was going. His pace slowed after 5 minutes, then stopped near a cluster of thick pine trees. Noah caught up, panting lightly. "Shadow, what the hell?" Then he saw it. A small wooden cabin, barely visible in the storm, half covered in drifting snow. The windows were dark. The door hung crooked on its hinges. It looked abandoned, until Noah noticed fresh footprints leading inside. He approached cautiously, drawing his flashlight. Shadow stood guard beside the door, tail still, eyes focused. Noah pushed it open. The inside was dim and cold, but not lifeless. A lantern sat on a crate near the wall, long since out of fuel. An empty can of beans. A child's puffer jacket, pink, neatly folded on a bench. On the floor near the fireplace, a folded piece of paper. Noah stepped inside. The scent hit him immediately. Body odor, food, something vaguely medicinal. Someone had been here recently. Maybe still was. He picked up the paper. It was a hand-drawn map of the surrounding woods, yellowed and torn at the edges. On it, a red marker circled a point labeled FTL-9. Noah narrowed his eyes. That wasn't a forest trail marker. It looked military, or federal. He looked at Shadow, who was now sniffing the corners of the cabin, his tail twitching slightly. "What did you bring me into?" he asked softly. A gust of wind blew snow through the cracked window. Noah crouched beside the small fireplace, running a finger over the soot. Cold. No fire had been lit for days. But the jacket, that was clean. Someone had been taking care of it. He picked it up. Inside the pocket was a wrapper, apple-flavored granola, the kind you only find in emergency ration kits. "Who's staying here?" Noah murmured. The storm roared outside. With no power back home and no clear danger, he decided to wait it out. The place was small, but intact. He started stacking bits of firewood from a pile in the corner and lit a small fire in the hearth with matches from his coat. As the flames crackled to life, warmth slowly filled the room. Shadow lay down in front of it, his head resting on his paws. For the first time, he let out a soft sigh. Not a bark, not a growl, just a release. Noah took off his gloves and sat on the bench, holding the map in both hands. "FTL-9, he said aloud. "Federal training location, field team location, facility." And then the memory came. A voice in the back of his mind, gravelly, laughing. "If I don't make it back, Briggs, you take care of it, all right?" Kyle Rourke. A sandstorm in Texas. The two of them sitting on an overturned crate, their canines lying beside them. Kyle had been joking, but there was something heavier behind the laugh. "Take care of what?" Noah had asked. Kyle had just tapped his boot against the crate and muttered, "You'll know." At the time, Noah thought he meant his gear, maybe even his dog. Now he wasn't so sure. Shadow raised his head and looked at Noah again, this time differently. There was something in his eyes, something past the fog of age, as if he remembered that moment too. Noah stood, walking to the window. The storm had eased slightly, but the world was still white and silent. Behind him, Shadow rested again, breathing even and slow. Noah folded the map and slipped it into his coat. "Looks like we've got somewhere to go tomorrow," he whispered. The cabin crackled with firelight, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind had calmed. For now. The morning after the storm, Clearwater lay hushed beneath a veil of pale sun and half-melted snow. The forest around the cabin steamed slightly as warmth returned to the air. Noah Briggs knelt beside Shadow near the fireplace, the paper map with FTL-9 still in his coat pocket. The night had been quiet, save for the occasional groan of pine wood and wind brushing against the glassless window. Shadow had slept lightly, waking at every strange creak, but now his breathing had slowed to a calm rhythm. The morning light slanted across his fur, revealing more than just age and ash, something that had been overlooked. As Noah ran his hand along the dog's neck, intending to check the collar one more time, his fingers caught on a raised ridge beneath the fur, higher than the others. He gently shifted the thick hair aside, revealing a thin, straight scar just below the ear. It wasn't jagged like a bite or accident. This one was surgical, precise. Noah leaned closer. Beneath the scar, faint but unmistakable, was a series of small, inked digits, a faded tattoo, partially obscured by time and scar tissue. He pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, and ran his finger along the numbers. It was no ID tag. These were coordinates. Noah opened his map app and plugged in the sequence. The result appeared on screen with a blinking red dot. The location, an old industrial district on the outskirts of Clearwater, near the railway. Hammond Yards, long since abandoned after a series of chemical leaks and labor strikes over a decade ago. It wasn't just empty, it was forgotten. But years ago, that same area had briefly been investigated during a human trafficking probe. There hadn't been enough evidence at the time to secure a warrant. Now, a retired canine had just pointed him there, with a code hidden under a scar. Noah stared at the dog, who blinked slowly at him. "What did you see?" he whispered. Later that morning, back at the precinct, Noah entered the tech office with Shadow by his side. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of computers and soft typing. In the far corner, tucked between towers of network routers and monitors, sat Mia Alvarez, the department's youngest IT specialist. Mia was in her early 20s, petite with short spiky black hair and an ever-present pair of oversized headphones slung around her neck. Her jeans were ripped, her nails painted alternating neon colors, and her workspace was organized chaos, half code, half candy wrappers. She glanced up as Noah approached, eyes tired but curious. "You're early, and you brought a dog. My day just got better." Noah offered a tight smile. "I need your help with something. Off the books." Mia leaned back in her chair and tapped her keyboard, turning down the lo-fi music playing behind her. "I'm listening." He handed her a flash drive. "This is the corrupted security footage from the abduction on Elm Street. Can you clean it up? Look for anything out of place." Mia raised an eyebrow. "You know the captain already signed off on that case as inconclusive due to poor visual integrity. You trying to play hero?" Noah folded his arms. "I just need another set of eyes. Fresh ones." Mia plugged in the drive and began parsing through the data. Her fingers moved fast, scanning frames. Then she paused. "Wait, hold up." Noah stepped behind her. On screen, frame by frame, a figure darted past the camera's blind spot. Small, cloaked in shadows. But behind it, unmistakable, was the silhouette of a German shepherd, cutting across the alley like a bullet. Mia enhanced the frame. Shadow's broad shoulders and narrow snout stood out even in low light. "That's your dog," she said. Noah nodded. "Shadow. He went missing 3 years ago after his handler was killed in a bombing. No record of adoption or recovery." Mia whistled softly. "He was trying to stop the abduction." "Looks like it." She zoomed in. "Wait. Here." Mia circled something in the lower corner. A shape, slumped behind a dumpster. A small figure. She reversed the frames. The girl had been there before the dog. But after the shepherd appeared, the kid was gone, pulled behind a car and out of frame. Seconds later, the vehicle drove off. "He saved her," Mia whispered. "No one ever noticed." Noah's hands tightened into fists. They thought he was just a stray. No one followed up. Mia turned to look at him, more serious now. "You're not wrong about something bigger going on, Briggs. This footage, it's a breadcrumb. Someone was watching that dog, or using him." Noah nodded slowly. "And I think I know where to go next." He pulled out his phone, showing her the coordinates. Mia copied them into her system. "Hammond Yards. That's off the city grid. I can pull satellite imaging for you. Maybe heat signatures if they've got a generator." "Thanks, Mia." She smiled. "Just promise me something." "What's that?" If you bring this dog in again, let me take a selfie with him." Noah chuckled, the first real laugh he'd allowed himself in weeks. "Deal." As he turned to leave, Shadow trotted beside him, tail swaying gently, eyes forward. The scar on his neck still looked raw in the daylight, but now it had meaning. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Noah Briggs and Shadow reached the edge of Hammond Yards. The old industrial zone stretched like a scar along the outskirts of Clearwater, a vast sprawl of rusting warehouses, gutted rail cars, and crumbling silos. Faded signs still warned of toxic waste and unstable ground, though no cleanup had ever truly begun. This was a place time and law had long since abandoned. Noah cut the engine of his cruiser several blocks away. They approached on foot, crunching over frost and gravel. The air was brittle, tinged with the scent of corroded metal and engine oil that never quite left this place. Overhead, the stars blinked dimly through a veil of icy haze. Shadow walked silently beside him. No leash, no command, just instinct. Noah glanced down at the dog as they entered the chain-link perimeter through a hole in the fence. Shadow's ears were perked, eyes scanning the darkness with eerie calm. Despite the old dog's age, there was something primal in his posture now, like gears long dormant had clicked back into motion. They weaved through the shadowed corridors between broken shipping containers and stacked crates. Noah's Glock was holstered at his hip, safety off. Every nerve in his body was on alert. Then Shadow stopped. They were outside a large metal warehouse with shattered upper windows and a rusting roof that curved like the shell of a beetle. Shadow sniffed the air, turned his head slightly, and trotted left, toward a drainage ditch filled with frozen runoff. Noah followed. At the base of the ditch, mostly buried in dead leaves and trash, was a metal grate. Shadow clawed at it gently. Noah knelt and lifted it with a grunt. The tunnel beneath was narrow and pitch black, but Shadow moved forward without hesitation. They advanced in silence. Noah used a small penlight, keeping it low. The passage curved downward until they reached a concrete crawlspace that opened into the underbelly of the warehouse. Noah heard it then. Faint echoes of voices, laughter, a distant clang. Above them, they emerged beneath a stairwell leading up to the warehouse's main floor. Shadow crept ahead, sticking to the walls. Noah climbed the stairs slowly, pressed against the shadows. Through the gaps in the upper floorboards he spotted movement. 2 armed men pacing near a metal door with a chain lock. One was thin and twitchy, wearing a camo jacket and beanie, muttering to himself. The other was heavy-set, chewing jerky with the kind of boredom that made him dangerous. Noah saw the door rattle from inside. A soft cry. Children. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Shadow growled low, almost imperceptibly, and then darted back into the darkness, disappearing between stacks of crates. Noah took his chance. He moved along the balcony that circled the interior of the warehouse, keeping low, his footfalls soundless on the steel grate. From his position above, he had a clear shot, but the kids were too close to the door. He needed to get closer. Just then, the fat man turned toward the noise Shadow had made. A heartbeat later, there was a crash. A toolbox slammed to the ground somewhere out of sight. The men spun, rifles up. "What was that?" the thin one barked. "Could be rats," the other growled. "Could be company." Noah slipped down the metal ladder on the far side and crept behind a forklift. Shadow struck. From the dark, he lunged at the thin man with terrifying precision. His teeth sank into the arm holding the rifle. The man screamed and staggered back, dropping his weapon. The other spun around, just in time for Noah to tackle him from the side, sending them both to the ground. Gunfire erupted, 3 shots in rapid succession. Noah rolled, yanking the man's arm behind his back, slamming his face into the concrete. Blood smeared the floor. Shadow released the other, circling him like a wolf, ready to pounce again. The man curled into a ball, moaning in panic. Noah kicked the rifle away, cuffed the downed guard, then turned to the door. 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, no older than 8, stared out at him through the wire window in the door, eyes wide and wet. He forced the chain lock loose and pulled the door open. The children backed away, trembling. "It's okay," Noah said gently. "You're safe now. I'm with the police." Shadow approached, nose low, body relaxed. The little girl stepped forward first and laid a hand on his head. Shadow licked her wrist softly. Noah called it in, voice steady even though his hands were shaking slightly. He gave their location, requested backup and medical, and then turned back toward the kids. Shadow sat near them, tail curled around his legs. Watching. Guarding. Then, as the silence returned to the warehouse, a low, hoarse sound escaped the dog's throat. Not a growl, a memory. His eyes had gone distant. He was somewhere else. The concrete floor, the metal, the scent of explosives. Kyle Rourke, his handler, once stood in a place like this, voice sharp, clear. "Protect them, boy. You hear me? No matter what. Protect them." And then he was gone. Shadow blinked. Now, 3 children stood before him, frightened, huddled, alive. He stepped forward, nudged the smallest boy with his nose. Alive. Noah knelt beside him, running a hand down the dog's scarred back. "You did good," he whispered. "You never forgot." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. But in the warehouse, surrounded by shadows and victory, the only sound was the soft breathing of 3 children and the quiet heart of an old hero. Beating strong. The courtroom in downtown Clearwater was nothing grand, just a square building with faded white columns and a flickering fluorescent bulb over the entrance. But to Noah Briggs, it felt heavier than any battlefield he'd ever stepped into. The polished linoleum echoed with the shuffling of heels, the murmur of legal aids and stern judges, but Noah heard none of it. His mind was fixed on the quiet figure lying beside his feet. Shadow, curled on a blanket, his breathing shallower than it had been just days before. The old dog was visibly weaker now. The wounds of his last stand, deep bruises, muscle strain, and exhaustion, were catching up. His fur had thinned around his flanks and the scar on his neck looked raw again. Yet, despite all that, when the bailiff called their case and opened the double doors, Shadow lifted his head, rose slowly to his feet, and walked into the courtroom with a soldier's dignity. Noah adjusted his blazer. He wasn't used to formal wear, but Sarah Klein had insisted. She stood beside him, calm and composed, wearing a gray tailored suit and her signature low bun. Her scar, barely visible under concealer, glinted faintly under the overhead lights. She had offered to represent Noah unofficially, not as his colleague, but as a friend. Her own time in foster care had taught her what legal systems could do to lives that didn't fit the rules. At the plaintiff's table sat Martin Delaney, a man in his early 50s with a receding hairline, beige corduroy jacket, and watery green eyes that didn't blink often enough. He was tall, with narrow shoulders, and walked with a stiff, exaggerated dignity. Delaney was Kyle Rourke's second cousin on his mother's side, though no one at the precinct had ever heard the name before. Word was he'd worked in property security in Nevada and had recently sold 2 trained Belgian Malinois to a private correctional firm in Arizona. The moment Shadow's name appeared in a local article about the warehouse raid, Delaney came out of the woodwork. Judge Ellen Hawthorne presided. In her late 60s, with sharp cheekbones, shoulder-length white hair, and reading glasses that hung from a silver chain, she was known throughout Clearwater for her quiet ferocity in the courtroom and her disdain for frivolous claims. She tapped her gavel lightly. Case 17B, Delaney v. Briggs. Custody rights regarding retired K-9 unit, Shadow. Delaney stood. "Your Honor, I am here to assert legal ownership over a working dog, formerly assigned to my deceased relative, Kyle Rourke. As next of kin, and in absence of an adoption transfer, I claim full rights under Montana's property inheritance statutes." Sarah rose. "Your Honor, Officer Briggs rescued Shadow from life-threatening neglect. The dog was abandoned, malnourished, and left for dead. Since then, Shadow has become not only a companion but a partner in the field. assisting in the rescue of 3 kidnapped minors and aiding in the capture of 2 traffickers. His actions went above and beyond, even in retirement. Judge Hawthorne narrowed her gaze. Is there any record of Mr. Delaney's care for the dog prior to Officer Briggs' rescue? Sarah held up a folder. None. In fact, there's a federal report confirming Shadow's disappearance after his handler's death. No attempt was made to claim or house him until recent headlines. Delaney shifted in his seat. I had no way to know where the dog was. The agency refused my requests. Noah clenched his jaw. He didn't speak. He hadn't spoken once in the courtroom, not until now. Shadow, as if sensing the tension, stepped forward. Every eye turned. The dog's gait was slow, deliberate. He walked across the courtroom floor, claws tapping gently against the tile until he stood just in front of Delaney. Then he stopped. He lifted his head and stared directly into the man's eyes. Delaney faltered. For a moment he tried to smile, tried to extend a hand, but Shadow didn't move. He just stared. Deeply, quietly. The entire courtroom went still. Then the doors creaked open again. A voice called softly but clearly, "Shadow?" Everyone turned. It was Maddie Holloway, the smallest of the 3 children rescued from Hammond Yards. She stood beside her foster mother, wearing a pink scarf and holding a small stuffed bear. Her wide hazel eyes lit up the moment she saw him. She broke free and ran across the room. "Shadow!" The old dog turned, ears lifting. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. Shadow didn't flinch. He leaned into her gently, pressing his head to her shoulder. Judge Hawthorne exhaled slowly and folded her hands. "I believe that says enough." Delaney rose. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The child—" "Mr. Delaney," she cut in, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "You speak again out of turn, and I'll hold you in contempt." She turned to Noah. "Officer Briggs, you are aware that retaining a retired canine without formal adoption protocol is outside of regulation." "Yes, Your Honor," Noah replied. "But sometimes regulations take time, and this dog didn't have that luxury. I didn't rescue him because he was a case. I rescued him because he mattered." She nodded. "So it seems." There was a long pause. Then, "This court recognizes the unique nature of the situation. Shadow will remain under the full custody of Officer Briggs, effective immediately, with all further documentation to be expedited through local animal control and federal canine registry." A gentle cheer rippled across the room. Sarah placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, whispering, "You did it." But Noah shook his head. "No," he said quietly, watching Maddie hug Shadow again. He did. The sky above Clearwater was washed in gold. It was late spring now, and the last of the snow had melted into memory. Wildflowers bloomed along the edges of the town's back roads, and sunlight filtered gently through the leaves of the massive white oak tree at the center of the property once known as Hartley Farm. Today, it bore a new name: Shadow's Watch. The sign, freshly painted and hung above the gated entrance, creaked slightly in the breeze. Below it, children from the local elementary school played fetch with 2 retired canines in the yard, one a sleek black Labrador, the other a Belgian Malinois missing part of one ear, but none of his spirit. Laughter rang through the open field. A few feet away, under the wide branches of the oak, lay Shadow. His body curled gently in the grass, tail thudding once in slow rhythm. His eyes, clouded now but still burning deep beneath the haze, watched the children play. There was no tension in his shoulders anymore. No flinch. No weight he carried alone. Beside him sat Noah, now a full-time trainer and founder of the sanctuary. His uniform had been traded for worn jeans, a forest green hoodie, and boots covered in soil. A small scar ran above his brow now, a souvenir from that final raid, but the shadows in his eyes had lessened. The pain was still there, but it no longer led the way. In his lap sat a small leather-bound journal, faded, scuffed at the corners. It had belonged to Kyle Rourke. Sarah had found it in an evidence box stored deep in the federal archive weeks after the trial ended. It was passed to Noah quietly, without ceremony, wrapped in a brown envelope labeled only with Kyle's badge number. Sarah had dropped it off herself. She still wore gray suits and that bun that didn't move in the wind, but lately she'd been more present. She now taught self-defense at the center every Friday, her voice calm but firm. The kids adored her, though she never said it, she found healing there too. Noah flipped open the journal and ran his thumb along the edge of the last page. Kyle's handwriting was rough, angled, like he always wrote in a hurry. The ink had smudged in some places, but the words still stood. If you're reading this, you probably know I didn't make it back. I won't tell you not to feel guilty. You will. I just hope someday you forgive yourself enough to trust again. If you can't trust people, trust him. Find Shadow. He'll show you what I never could, what I almost forgot. Loyalty isn't about orders. It's about belief. Shadow never stopped believing, even when I did. You find him, you'll find what I left behind. Not the missions, not the medals, but faith. Noah folded the journal shut and slipped it into the pocket of his jacket. A stone bench stood a few steps behind him, near the base of the oak. Carved into its smooth gray surface were the words, "To Kyle, the friend who never gave up, and Shadow, the silent soldier who never needed to speak." Maddie Holloway sat on the bench now, sketching in her notebook. Her pink scarf had faded a bit, and her hair was pulled into a braid, uneven but proud. Shadow's presence had changed her. Her foster mother often said she laughed more, slept better, and finally talked without fear. She glanced at Noah and smiled. "He's been out here all day." "I know," Noah replied. "He's exactly where he wants to be." In the distance, another car pulled up. A woman stepped out, medium height, late 30s, with long brown curls and arms full of dog food bags. Linda Park, a local volunteer and former military vet, waved at Noah. She had a quiet kindness and always brought homemade treats for the dogs. Her calm presence had become essential to the center's rhythm. Inside the main facility, a young vet tech named Tommy Duclair, barely 22 with freckles and an endless supply of dad jokes, was cleaning out the kennels, humming some old rock ballad off-key. Everyone had a role. Everyone belonged. The sanctuary had become more than Noah ever imagined. Not just a home for retired canines, but a space where broken people found pieces of themselves again, through fur, patience, and the unspoken kind of love only dogs know how to offer. Noah reached down and stroked Shadow's head. The dog's eyes fluttered, but didn't close. "You remember what he told me?" Noah whispered. "To find you. To learn to believe again." Shadow didn't move, but Noah could feel it in the rise and fall of his chest. Steady, strong, present. "You did that," Noah said. "You brought it all back." The sun lowered behind the hills, casting long shadows across the field. Kids were called back to school buses. Dogs were guided gently into the kennels for rest. Linda finished her drop-off and waved goodbye. Sarah leaned against the gate, watching everything with a quiet smile. Noah sat a while longer under the tree. When he stood, Shadow stood with him, slowly but without hesitation. They walked together toward the building, side by side. Behind them, the bench stood firm beneath the oak. And from the high windows of the sanctuary one could see it all, the words carved in stone, the man who had once been lost, and the dog who had never stopped believing. This was not a battlefield. This was home. Sometimes the miracles we wait for don't arrive in lightning or thunder, but in silence, in the form of a tired old dog who never stopped believing. Shadow didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't ask for anything. Yet, through his loyalty, he reminded us all that love never retires. This story isn't just about a canine hero. It's about faith, the kind that lives quietly in the corners of our lives until it's called to rise again. Maybe you've been through a storm. Maybe you've felt abandoned, unseen, or forgotten. But, like Shadow, perhaps your story isn't over. Perhaps God is working behind the scenes, placing the right people, the right moments, and the right kind of love in your path, even when you least expect it. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are real. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a dog who changed your life, or simply write Amen if you believe no soul should be left behind. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of hope, healing, and redemption. And as you go on with your day, may God bless you, watch over those you love, and remind you, even in the quietest moments, that you are never alone. Comment Amen if you believe every creature deserves a home,